The most notable women were among the most famous in the district. Some of those women were almost like sisters to Maomao. The carriage clattered along, and familiar scenery came into view. She saw a street stall selling meat skewers, the ones she had longed to eat. The aroma wafted to her as they drove past. The branches of willow trees drooped over a canal. She heard someone selling firewood. Children ran by, each carrying a pinwheel. They passed under an ornate gate. A world painted in a riot of colours spread out before them. It was still midday, and not many people were about. A few idle ladies of the night waved from the second floors of their establishments. Finally, the carriage stopped in front of a building. Its entry was noticeably larger than that of many others. Maomao hopped out and jogged over to a slim old woman. The woman stood smoking a pipe by the entrance. "Hey, Grams, haven't seen you in a while." Long ago she had been a lady said to possess tears of pearl. Now her tears had dried up like faded leaves. She had refused offers to buy her freedom from bondage. Instead she remained as the years passed, until now she was an old hand feared by everyone. Time was cruel indeed. A while indeed, you ignorant brat. A shock ran through Maomao's solar plexus. She felt bile rise in her throat, a bitter taste welling up in her mouth. Strangely, even this felt familiar and nostalgic. How many times had she been made to vomit out poisons she had ingested too much of? Lehaku was at a loss to understand exactly what was going on, but being a fundamentally decent person, he rubbed Maomao gently on the back. "Who is this woman?" his expression seemed to ask. Maomao scuffed some dust over the sodden ground with her foot. Lehaku looked at her with concern. "Huh, so this is your so-called customer, eh?" The madam gave Lehaku an appraising look. The carriage was entrusted to the establishment's menservants. "Good, strong body, manly features. He is an up-and-comer from what I hear. Grams, I don't think you usually say that right in front of the person you are talking about." The madam pretended not to hear. She called for the apprentice, a prostitute in training who was sweeping in front of the gate. "Go call Perrin. I think she is lazing about somewhere today." Perrin. Lehaku swallowed heavily. Perrin was one of those famed courtesans. It was said her specialty was exquisite dancing. For the sake of Lehaku's reputation, we should add that what he felt was not simple lust for a female companion, but sincere appreciation for a woman of genuine talents. To meet this idol who seemed to live above the clouds was a great honor. Even simply to take tea with her was a great honor. Perhaps Perrin could do extremely fine work for those she liked. "Master Lehaku," Maomao said, giving the big but currently vacant-eyed man beside her a jab. "How confident are you in your biceps? Not quite sure what you mean, but I like to think I've honed my body as well as any man." "Is that so? Best of luck, then." Lehaku gave her a final, puzzled tilt of the head as the young apprentice led him away. Maomao was thankful to Lehaku for bringing her here. She wanted to give him something that would adequately express her gratitude. A night's dream could provide a lifetime's memory. "Now, Maomao," the owner of the hoarse voice wore a terrible smile. "Not a word for 10 whole months. What was I supposed to do? I was serving in the rear palace." At least she had sent a wood strip explaining the general situation. "You owe me big. You know I never take first-time customers." "Believe me, I know." Maomao pulled a pouch out of her bag. It contained half of her earnings from the rear palace so far. She had specially asked for an advance on her salary. The woman sniffed, peering into the pouch. "Not nearly enough. I admit I didn't expect you to actually produce Perrin." She had thought the money would cover a night's dalliance with a highly ranked courtesan. Moreover, someone like Lehaku would likely have been happy just to see the 3 princesses. At least act like it's enough for a shared cup of tea. "Please, do it for me. A fool, a muscle-brained bozo like that. Perrin will become angry and you know it. I suppose I could have predicted that." The most esteemed courtesans did not sell their bodies, but that did not mean they could not fall in love. That was simply the way of things. "Let us just say it is out of my hands." "Never. It is going on your tab. There is no way I can pay that much. I do not think even the rest of my salary would make up the difference." No way. Maomao was deep in thought. The woman was clearly messing with her. Not that that was anything new. "Well, if worst comes to worst, you can pay off your debt with your body. I know His Majesty is your only customer in that big, fancy palace, but it is the same idea. And do not worry about all those scars. We get certain types who like that sort of thing. For lo these many years, the madam had persisted in trying to get Maomao to become a courtesan. Having spent her entire life in the red light district, the woman did not think a courtesan's lot was an unhappy one. I still have a year left on my contract. Then spend it scaring up more customers for me. Not old farts, though. Young men like your friend today, men we can get something from. Aha, so she does think there is profit to be had. The only thing the old woman ever thought about was where the money was. Maomao had no intention of ever selling herself. Therefore, she would have to begin supplying a steady stream of sacrifices to the madam. Anyone who seemed feasible. She wondered if she could get away with sending eunuchs. Jinchi's face drifted through her mind, but Maomao dismissed the idea. The courtesans might get so serious about him that they would bring the whole establishment to its knees. She did not want that. But she also felt it would be bad to send Gaoshun or the quack doctor. She did not want to be the reason they ended up exhausted by the old lady. Now Maomao really regretted there were so few good ways to meet men in the rear palace. Maomao, your husband should be at home. Scamper along and see him. Yeah, thanks. Think as she might, she could not resolve the issue here and now. Maomao ducked down a side path beside the verdigris house. Just a single street further along, the red light district became a much more lonely place. Shacks that looked like shops or houses were tumbledown. Beggars waited for someone to throw a little change into the broken teacups they held. Night walkers had visible scars from syphilis. One of these ragged buildings was Maomao's home. It was a cramped house with a dirt floor. Inside, a figure knelt on a rush mat. He was bent over a mortar and pestle, working it industriously. The man had deep wrinkles on his face and a gentle appearance. He almost looked like a grandmother. Hey, Pops. I'm back. It took you a while, her father said. He greeted her the same way he always had, as if nothing had happened. Then he went to prepare tea, walking with an unsteady gait. He poured it into a battered teacup, which Maomao received gratefully. Even though it was made from tired leaves, the tea was warm and relaxed her. Maomao started to talk about all that had happened to her, one thing after another. Her father listened with only the occasional hum or huh. For dinner they had congee thickened with herbs and potatoes. Then Maomao went straight to bed. She decided a bath could wait until the next day. She could borrow some nice hot water from the verdigris house then. She curled up on her simple bedding, a mat laid out on the dirt floor. Her father pulled a kimono over her. Then he stoked the fire in the oven to ensure it wouldn't go out. The rear palace that's calmer, I suppose, her father whispered, but the words didn't reach Maomao, she was already asleep. Chapter 23 Wheat Stalks, oh yeah. The crowing of the rooster woke Maomao up, and she shuffled outside her dilapidated house. There was a small chicken coop in the back and a shed for farm implements, along with a wooden crate. She gathered her father was in the field because the hoe was missing. He kept one in a grove just outside the red light district. He knows that is not good for his legs. Her father was getting on in years. She wished he would stop with the difficult physical labor, but he showed no sign of doing so. He liked to make his medicines from herbs he had grown himself. Therefore, a motley collection of strange plants sprouted around their house. Maomao plucked a leaf here and there, checking how the plants were doing. She glanced at the discreet wooden crate. It bore a sign with characters written in brushwork. The sign read "Hands off." Maomao swallowed. She nudged the lid back and peeked inside, although her heart rate quickened. If she remembered correctly, the crate contained various ingredients. These ingredients had been left to stew in wine. She seemed to recall the ingredients being very lively and difficult to catch. After a moment, Maomao put the lid back exactly as it had been. It seemed people were heeding the sign. Her father was ever a careful thinker, and he had wisely put just one thing inside the box. That was a wise choice. Several together might eat each other and become toxic. All right anyway. Her thoughts were interrupted by a noisy pounding at the door. Scratching her head lazily, Maomao went around to the front of the house. "You're going to break it," she said to the panicked-looking girl who had been slamming her fist against the unsteady door. She was not from the verdigris house. She was a servant apprentice at another of the nearby brothels, and she occasionally came to Maomao's pharmacy. "What's up? If you are looking for my dad, he is out." Maomao was in the middle of a yawn when the girl grabbed her hand and veritably dragged her away. The apprentice brought Maomao to a middling brothel not far from the verdigris house. It was not a large place, but it had decent quality. Maomao remembered there were several courtesans here, and some excellent patrons visited. But what did the servant girl want by bringing her here? Maomao tried to straighten her frazzled hair and brush the wrinkles from her clothes. She had not changed into her sleepwear the night before. This was starting to seem like a good thing. She had been planning to get hot water from the verdigris house. "Sister, I brought the apothecary," the girl called. They went through the back door of the brothel and headed for one of the rooms. There Maomao discovered a cluster of women. They wore no makeup and looked fatigued. They were gathered around something she could not see. When she got closer, she found a man and a woman lying on a bed. They were sharing a pillow, and spittle was dribbling out of their mouths. There were traces of vomit on the bedding. A pipe lay on the floor nearby, and tobacco leaves were scattered around. She also saw some pieces of straw on the ground, and a shattered glass vessel was close by. Its contents had spilled, staining the pillow. The air held a very distinctive aroma. 2 wine bottles were also part of the chaos, tipped over and spilled. The 2 differently coloured stains on the pillow looked almost like some strange kind of art. When confronted with this scene, Maomao's eyes snapped open and she was no longer sleepy. She pried open the man's and woman's eyes, looking into them. She checked their pulses and stuck a finger in their mouths. She was not the first, it seemed. The fingers of one of the courtesans were filthy with sick. The man was not breathing, so Maomao pressed on his solar plexus to try and make him disgorge the contents of his stomach. There was a sound, and spit came pouring out of his mouth. She grabbed the sheets to wipe the inside of his mouth. Finally, she slid him around and breathed into his mouth. Seeing this, one of the courtesans tried to imitate what Maomao had done for the woman. Unlike the man, she was still breathing, so she was easily induced to vomit. The courtesan moved to offer her some water, but Maomao shouted, "Don't let her drink that. Charcoal, we need charcoal." The startled courtesan spilled the water in her surprise, then rushed off down the hallway. Maomao repeated the process with the man several more times. She pressed on his chest to induce vomiting, then breathed for him. He finally started to breathe on his own when only stomach acid began to rise. Maomao, exhausted at this point, accepted the water that was offered to her. She rinsed out her mouth and then spat the water out the nearby window. It was the first annoying thing that morning. She had not even eaten breakfast, and now she felt like she wanted to go back to bed. But she shook her head to fight off the feeling and called the servant girl. "Bring my father here. He is probably in the field by the south wall. Give this to him, he will know what it means." She had a wooden writing slip brought and scrawled a few characters on it. Then she gave it to the girl. The child looked conflicted, but she took it and left. Maomao took another mouthful of water, drinking it down this time. Then she began powdering the charcoal that had been brought. Stupid, annoying, troublesome thing to do, she thought, scowling at the tobacco leaves and then heaving a sigh. About half an hour later, an elderly man with bad legs arrived, led by the servant girl. It took her long enough, Maomao thought, but she showed her father the carefully pulverized charcoal. He added dried leaves from a few different varieties of herbs, then gave the concoction to the man and woman to drink. "I guess you did a passable job dealing with this," he said. Then he picked up one of the pieces of straw from the floor and studied one end of it intently. Just passable. Maomao watched her father old but by no means soft work. He picked up a shard of glass from the floor. He also picked up some of the tobacco leaves. Finally, he examined some of the vomit. It was the first vomit that had come out before Maomao arrived. She studied him as he went about his work. She had a habit of observing her surroundings closely, and she surely got it from him. This man, her adoptive father and a master apothecary, could discern 2 or 3 new things from just one fact. Her father said, "What poison did you take this to be?" His tone implied he was giving her a lesson. Maomao picked up a tobacco leaf and showed it to him. A wide smile crossed his wrinkled face as if to say, "Yes, that is right. It appears you didn't let them drink any water." That would be counterproductive, wouldn't it? Her father responded with a gesture that seemed to be both a nod and a shake of the head at the same time. It depends. Stomach acid can help prevent the absorption of poison. In those cases, giving the patient water is counterproductive. But if the agent was dissolved in water to begin with, then diluting it is sometimes the best choice. He explained everything slowly and carefully, as though instructing a child. Certainly, her father's presence may have kept Maomao from fully considering herself an apothecary. Perhaps he also caused her to underestimate the Rear Palace's doctor. When Maomao noticed the vomit contained no tobacco leaves, she understood her father's method was likely correct. She might not have always noticed when the leaves disappeared, but she had overlooked it nonetheless. Perhaps she had been sleepier than she thought. As she tried to remember the course of treatment, the apprentice girl tugged on her sleeve. "This way," the girl said. Was it just Maomao's imagination, or did the girl look sullen? In any case, Maomao allowed herself to be shown to a room where tea had been prepared. A woman said, "You must pardon all the trouble," as she portioned out a treat of sweet red beans. She looked like she was no longer practicing the profession. Maomao guessed she was the madam of this particular house. She did not seem to share the same miserly nature as the madam of the verdigris house. She would never have offered tea and sweets to a simple apothecary. Customers only was her rule. "We only did our job, ma'am." Maomao would be content if they were simply paid for their work. Her father sat beside her in a jovial mood. He was often likely to forget about the money, so Maomao had to make sure she received it. The woman squinted, looking into the next room. The courtesan who had been sick was now asleep. The male customer was sleeping in another room. The woman's face darkened noticeably. Was it an attempted lover's suicide? It wasn't that unusual in the red light district. When a man without money met a woman with too much time left on her contract, it was always the first thing they considered. They would whisper sweet nothings about meeting each other in the next life. It was a time when there was no proof such a thing even existed. Maomao took a bit of the red bean treat and chewed thoughtfully. The tea was lukewarm, with a wheat stalk lounging on one side. "You know, I saw a couple of those back in that room," Maomao reflected. Stems of wheat were hollow on the inside. This one was intended to serve as a straw. Brothels here disliked lipstick on the drinkware, so it was customary to use wheat stalks for drinking. It is amazing how complicated a little friendship between men and women could be. The man in that room had looked very well-to-do. He seemed like a playboy, certainly, but he had been wearing a robe backed with fine silk. He had a charming face. It was the sort of face an inexperienced young woman might easily be drawn to. Maomao knew her father would scold her for letting prejudice influence her thoughts, but this woman did not look like a lady of the night who had taken poison in despair over her future. She did not look like someone who felt cornered enough to want to die. Once Maomao got an idea into her head, she could not let it go until she had followed it through. It was just how she was. Once she was sure her father had gotten the money from the madam, she said, "I am going to go check on the patient," and left the room. The man was in worse shape than the courtesan. When Maomao headed for her room on the far side of the building, she noticed the door was slightly ajar. Through the small crack, she saw something very strange. It was the servant girl, the disconsolate child who had brought her here, and she was raising a knife over her head. "Hey, what are you doing?" Maomao said as she hurried into the room and took the knife from the child. "Don't you stop me. He deserves to die." The girl launched herself at Maomao, trying to get the knife back. Maomao was quite small. A child might even have overpowered her if truly desperate. With no other choice, Maomao hit the girl on the head. While the girl was still reeling from the blow, Maomao slapped her hard across the cheek. The girl fell back from the impact. She began to cry, huge racking sobs escaping her as her nose leaked a lot of snot. Maomao was just registering her own disbelief when another courtesan came into the room, alerted by the noise. "What in the world is happening here?" she exclaimed. She quickly seemed to grasp the answer to her own question, however. Maomao was then hustled away to another room, which was detrimental to her investigation. The man at the center of this attempted lover's suicide, it transpired, was already a notoriously problematic customer. He was the third son of a wealthy merchant family. He often used his handsome looks and silver tongue to win the favor of courtesans. He would string them along with vague promises of buying their contracts. Then he cast them aside when he tired of them. At least one woman had lost hope and ended her life. This was not the first time he had faced intense resentment. Other women, furious about his infidelity, had tried to stab him or poison him. However, as the son of his father's favored concubine, his father always managed to get him out of trouble. This made him a spoiled and rotten child. Recently, he had even convinced his father to provide bodyguards to escort him safely to the brothels. A courtesan explained as she stroked the child, who continued to cry. She said, this girl's older sister worked at another shop. The servant girl's sister had been one of the women the man had loved, and then abandoned. The last thing the girl heard from her sister was a letter. The letter joyfully told her that her sister would be bought out of her contract. Then, the child heard that her sister had killed herself.